Hey everybody, Jeff Schneider here. So imagine hearing a song for the first time and instantly knowing how to play it without reading sheet music, without having to look up a chord chart, without even having to touch an instrument. You might think that's impossible, but it's not. It's a skill anyone can develop, and today I'm going to show you exactly how with a system I call the chord map method. It's a simple 3-step process. Now, that doesn't mean that by the end of this video, you're going to magically have perfect pitch, but what it does mean is that you'll have a clear, repeatable system to figure out the chords to any song. Now, this video is going to be thorough. I'm going to walk you through each step in detail. And to get the most out of it, I highly recommend you follow along and participate. Now that's going to mean you're going to do a little bit of singing. Even if you're not a singer, I've said this before, how well you sing is how well you hear. All right, enough housekeeping. Let's get into it with step number 1. So imagine you're about to go on a hike and you get to the part where all the trails are and you see that map there with the red dot and it says you are here. Now in music, that dot that says you are here is your key center. It is the most important thing. You need it to help orient yourself in the song and figure out where all of the other chords are. I should also mention that sometimes I'll refer to the key center as the tonic or the one. They all kind of mean the same thing. But how do you figure it out? How do you know what the key center is? That's what we're going to do now. Now, for some of you, it's going to be fairly easy to identify the key center, and for others, it's going to be a challenge. So I'm going to walk you through how to do this one step at a time, and we're going to start with some songs, and I'm going to tell you the key center in advance. The whole idea here is to sing the tonic so we can get a sense of how it feels to sing the key center while the song is playing. So we're going to start with a very simple song. This is Ba Ba Black Sheep, and it's in the key of G major. Don't worry, later on, I'm going to tell you how to figure out the key center without me telling it to you in advance, but this is in G major. So what we're gonna do is sing the G right here. You can sing it down here if you want, but I think singing it up a little higher helps get the clarity there. Sometimes when people sing low, it gets a little bit garbled, but let's sing the G along with the recording of Ba Ba Black Sheep. Da 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 da, this is G, la da 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 da, this is the key center, okay. And if I sing this note right here, it might sound all right, but it doesn't sound as resolved as this one. Do you hear that resolution, that sense of arrival when I go down here? That's home bass, that's your key center, that's your tonic. Let's do another example. This one is in the key of F major. Da 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 da, this is the key center. And I'm gonna play the recording right now. Remember, this is the key center, F. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. If I pause it, if I sing this note right here or this note right here, you can hear how they don't sound as resolved as this note right here. This note has that sense of arrival. All right, let's move along. I'm now going to show you how to figure out what the key center is without having to look it up in advance or having me tell you. This is how you do it. You're going to pick a song, and I recommend choosing something easy like a nursery rhyme. We're going to use Ba Ba Black Sheep again for this example. And the first thing you're going to do is sing the melody. That's going to help you get your ear into gear and get you locked into the feeling of that key center. Da 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 da. And then you're going to pause on a note. We're going to call it the pause note. Any note you want. In this case, I'm going to stop on this note. I'm going to pause right here. And then from that pause note, sing down the scale until you feel like you've arrived at home base. So if I'm paused right here, I'm going to sing down the scale until I reach this note right here. Da 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 da. And that feels like I've arrived. Now you can pause on any note in the melody. You can go da 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 da. And that's your pause note. Da, da, da. You want to rely on your intuition here. This is important. I don't want you thinking too much. Just go down whatever scale feels right and stop when you feel like you can't go anymore, when it feels resolved. Okay, quick recap. You're going to pick a song, sing the melody, pause on any note, and then from there, sing down the scale until you feel like you can't go any further because you've arrived. You're at the most resolved note. Also, one other thing you can do is, once you figure out the tonic note, try to figure out if it's major or minor. Is it G major or G minor? And a great way to do that is, well, you can just guess, and if it feels like a song that's happy or bright, then it's probably major, or if it's dark, moody, or sad, it's probably minor, but you can always check afterwards. So for instance, Ba Ba Black Sheep, if I play G major, that fits pretty good. Now if I play G minor, no, that doesn't work. So it's G major. It's not rocket science, just try the major chord and the minor chord, and whichever one sounds better is most likely the key that that song is in. Now, before we go on to step number 2, I want to encourage you to do one more thing, and that is whenever you're out and about, you're at the grocery store, you're at the pharmacy, and there's a song playing on the radio, try to figure out what key that song is in. Do the same steps. Sing the melody, you can do it under your breath, and go down that scale until you arrive at the key center. Or if you want, you can even try skipping the melody step and just sing the note that feels most resolved. When you get home, you can always go to your instrument, figure out what note you were singing, and see if you were right. All right, we're back and moving on to step 2. And the next thing we need to do, now that we know the key center, is figure out the chords. But we're not going to name the chords like C major or F minor. We're going to identify the chord functions. Here's what I mean. Let's use the key of C major for this explanation. If I play a C major scale, I can take those notes and create chords with it. So I can use this shape right here. That's a C major chord. There's D minor, E minor, F major. Now each of those chords has a chord function or a number that we associate with it. So C major is the 1 chord in the key of C major. D minor is the 2 chord in the key of C major, and so on. Now you can see on the chord scale chart that I have up on the screen that all of the chords are identified with not regular numbers but Roman numerals. And that's just how we talk about chord functions within the world of music theory. Now you can download this chord scale chart as well as all of the other ones for the other keys. It's free in the link in the description below. Highly recommend you grab that, especially for the purposes of this video. You can also think of the chord function as the role that that chord plays. It's kind of like if the chord name, like C major or F minor or whatever, that's like the what, the chord function is the why. And it's really helpful to think in terms of chord functions because it allows you to see progressions and understand how these chords fit together. And you can actually predict where a chord progression might be going because you recognize it as a common chord progression. So for instance, if we use an example in just everyday language, if I say, my alarm clock went off this morning, I woke up and I got out of bed. You can finish my sentence because you see where it's going. The same thing is true for chord progressions. Like if we're in the jazz genre and I say 2-5, the chord that likely follows is 1 because that's a really common chord progression. But we still have to answer the obvious question. How do you identify a chord function by ear? And here's the thing, you can already do this to a certain extent. Each chord function has a personality or a color. So for instance, if I play this progression right here, that last chord has this feeling of home or arrival, just like we did when we were identifying the key center. You can identify that feeling, that personality of that chord. It feels like home, and it's the 1 chord. So you can make that association between the 1 chord and this feeling of arrival or this feeling of arriving at home base. Now, each of the other chord functions has a distinct personality. It's just a matter of getting to know them. And here's what's really cool. Once you do get to know each of these chord function colors or personalities, once you're able to recognize them, you'll be able to figure out chord progressions by ear extremely quickly. Identifying a chord function color is so much faster than having to figure out the individual notes within the chord and kind of transcribe it. That's so much more calculated, takes a lot longer. You can do that quickly, but nowhere near as quickly as just hearing a chord, identifying the color and knowing, oh, that's the 1 chord or that's the 4 chord. Here's an analogy I think is helpful. So if you imagine looking at somebody's face and you notice that the corners of their mouth, they're turned down and they have a furrowed brow, you might be able to figure out, well, they probably feel sad or worried. But it's an inefficient way of determining somebody's emotion by looking at the specific features rather than just zooming out, seeing their face as a whole and just instantly knowing, oh, they're sad or they're worried. You don't have to look at the individual facial features to calculate somebody's emotion. You just look at them and you know. That's what we're going for with this chord function identification process. One of the most helpful tips I can give you is to not try to memorize the sound of a chord function color in isolation, but rather in a mini progression, like 2, 3, maybe 4 chords at most, and hear how those chords sound in sequence rather than on their own. Another helpful analogy, if I take a picture of your best friend and I zoom all the way in on their nose, you're probably not going to be able to tell who that person is. But as I zoom out, maybe you see the mouth and the nose, maybe an eye. As you get more context, it's a lot easier to identify who you're looking at. we want to do the same thing with chords. We want to create some context. So if we're in the key of C major, and I play the 4 chord, which is F major, instead of just saying, okay, memorize what that sounds like, I'm going to play the 4 chord going back to the 1 chord. That's also called a plagal cadence, that 4 chord going to the 1 chord, which is a different sound than the 5 chord going to the 1 chord. And when you compare the two back to back, you can more easily hear the difference. Here's 4 to 1, and here's 5 to 1. Now we're starting with these chord progressions, the 4 to 1 and the 5 to 1, because they're some of the most common chord progressions you're going to see in any song, in any genre of music. So obviously when you start studying these mini progressions, start with the ones that are most likely to show up in the music you want to play, and the music you want to figure out the chords to. So just for fun, let's do a little ear training right now. I'll play 5 progressions, and all you have to do is write down, is it a 4 to 1 or a 5 to 1? Now remember, when you do this exercise, I don't want you listening for individual notes. Don't listen for the bass. Don't listen for any of the notes in the chord voicing. Just zoom out, try to absorb the entire chord color, and just, you can even guess, is it a 4 to 1 or is it a 5 to 1? All right, first I'm gonna establish the key center. We're gonna stay in the key of C major here. All right, here's number 1. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. And I'll put the answers up on the screen so you can see how you did. All right, so you can study these mini chord progressions in this methodical way, but another way to start to get to know the chord function colors, and especially in a mini chord progression setting, is to actually use song association. Here's what I mean. Here's a song that I'm sure many of you have heard. It's called Take Me to Church by, I think it's pronounced Hoosier. And I'm gonna play just a small clip of it. It's in the pre-chorus. Check this out. Amen. Amen. Okay, so this pre-chorus right here actually uses that 4 to 1 cadence. It's in the key of G major, so we're going from a C major chord to a G major chord. And what I mean by song association is when you hear a similar sound to that progression right there, and it makes you think of, oh, that's the little thing that happens in Take Me to Church during that pre-chorus. Instead of thinking of it as 4 to 1, you can just think of it as, oh, that's the Take Me to Church progression. It's a song association rather than this more abstract, oh, it's 4 to 1. Especially when you hear a song that you really like and you're like, oh, what chords are those? Like I have a good example. I remember when I was a kid and I'd watch Saturday Night Live, at the very end, they play this theme called the Waltz in A, and it has this progression in it that the first time I heard it, I was like, what is that? So it starts in A. And this chord right here, that's a C#7, but more importantly, it's the 3 dominant chord. So that was a really effective way of memorizing that 3 dominant chord function. Another example from when I was a kid was the first time I heard the song All By Myself by Eric Carmen, made probably more famous by Celine Dion. It starts off in the key of F major, then it goes to B flat minor, and then back to F major. And that sound of that B flat minor, which in terms of chord functions is a 4 minor chord in the context of a major key, it made this imprint on my ear that I never forgot. And whenever I heard that 4 minor sound, I always linked it to All By Myself. And so that was a really easy way for me to remember and have some sort of association with the sound, the color of a 4 minor chord in the context of a major key. And you can take this song association technique and expand it to include several chords. So you probably recognize this progression too. All right, so that's the beginning of Pachelbel's canon, which is a very common chord progression. And if you hear that progression, you're like, oh, if you know what it is, if you know that it's the 1 going to the 5, going to the 6, and so on, 1, 5, 6, then it goes to the 3, and then to the 4. All you have to do is memorize a handful of numbers. It's the 1 to the 5 to the 6 to the 3. Even if you just do that much, whenever you hear this chord progression come around, you'll think, oh, it's Pachelbel's canon, which is 1, 5, 6, 3. Boom. You have that chord progression, that color. You're not transcribing anything. You're not listening for the bass notes or anything like that. You hear that familiar sound in another song and you think, oh, that's the progression from Pachelbel's canon. I know what that is. It's the 1 to the 5 to the 6 to the 3. Boom. You've just transcribed 4 chords instantly. All right, here's another helpful tip. Some of these chords and chord progressions are easily confused. Like for instance, if you're a chef and you're tasting a dish and you're trying to figure out what ingredients are in it, there are some flavors that are similar, like thyme and oregano. They're easily confused. The same thing is true for chords. Take, for instance, the 6 chord and the 3 chord. They're both minor. They both have a similar level of stability. Listen to the difference, though. If I play them back to back, it's easier to hear the difference in color. So I'm going to set up that key again so you can hear how it sounds in context. We're in C major. And here's the 6 chord, A minor. All right, that has that color. Here's the 3 chord. Again, C major. Here's E minor. That's the 3 chord. It's got a different feel than the 6 chord. Here's the 6 again. That has a different sound than this. To me, the 3 chord sounds even sadder than the 6 chord. And if you can make those word associations that aren't musically related, like I'm not saying it's minor, I'm saying it's sadder, that's a helpful way to build up a memory of that chord function color. Okay, one more tip for this section, and that is to actually cook using these flavors. So that means actually compose music, and as you're coming up with your chord progressions, pay attention to what the chord function is. Don't just think, oh, it's an F major chord. Think, oh, it's a 4 chord. Don't just think it's F major to G major to A minor. No, you want to think it's the 4 going to the 5, going to the 6. You got to come at this from both ends. From the listening end, where you're listening and trying to figure out the chords to other people's music, but also when you're composing, when you're writing, actually thinking about the chord functions during that process. Okay, quick recap. All you're doing here is hearing a chord and going, oh, that sounds like the 1 chord. Oh, that sounds like a 4-5-1 progression. We're just recognizing chord functions. Practice this with simple songs. Children's music is great. Lullabies are great. They're slow. The harmony is simple. Start there, and then you can move along to more complex chord progressions. And remember, you're not transcribing individual notes. You're not listening for the bass here. You're not listening for individual notes within the chord voicing. You're absorbing this overall sound of the chord and feeling your way through it. Do not calculate. Don't look at the individual facial features. Look at the entire face and just read the emotion. See the color and get to know the personalities of each one of these chords and mini chord progressions. Okay, we are on to the final step. Step number 3. This one is all about figuring out the actual chord names. Now you might be wondering, what if I don't know the chord functions? Like what if I can't figure them out? That's okay. That's what step 3 is all about. Now, if you do know the chord functions, like if you are able to identify, oh, that sounds like the 4 chord, and you know what key you're in, say you're in the key of G major, then you know the chord, you know it's C major. So if you know the chord function, use the music theory, use the chord scale charts to figure out what chord that is in whatever key you're in. But if you don't know the chord function, that's what we're going to talk about now. So it's kind of like you have plan A and plan B. Plan A is figure out the chord function, but if you can't do that, you go to plan B and transcribe the chord. And then you can always backwards engineer it, and if you know the chord name and you know what key you're in, you can then figure out what the chord function is. It's kind of like doing the whole thing in reverse. You know the chord is C major, you know you're in the key of G major, so you know it's the 4 chord. But how do you transcribe the chord in the first place? It sounds like a daunting task. There are so many possible chords, there's so many notes and combinations of notes. Well, the way we're going to streamline the process is first by determining the usual suspects. In other words, we're going to think about what chords are likely to be in the song that you're trying to figure out. We already talked about key centers and how there are 7 chords that belong to each key. So that already narrows it down quite a bit. You can also consider the genre of music. So for instance, blues music is likely to have a 1 chord, a 4 chord, and a 5 chord. Pop music is likely to have the 1, the 4, the 5, and the 6. If you get to more sophisticated R&B influenced pop music, you might have a 3 chord in there or a 2 chord. And if you're in the world of jazz, you might actually find chords that are outside the key. Think secondary dominance and modal mixture. Of course, there's going to be exceptions, but getting your head in the right space in terms of the key center and the genre, it's just going to speed up this whole process. So now that you have an idea of what chords are likely to show up, the next step is to listen to the recording and pay attention specifically to the bass. Why? Because the bass, most of the time, plays the roots of the chords. Now that doesn't mean every note in the bass line is a root of a chord. Some bass lines are complex. You have to listen for the notes that are most emphasized. Take a listen to this simple example here. It's a C major chord, and in the bass, I'm playing C, but also G. Does that mean I'm playing a G chord in there too? No, it's just part of the bass line. I'm emphasizing that C. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. The C is on those strong beats, 1 and 3. So you have to kind of suss out what notes are roots and what notes are just decoration within the bass line. Okay, so let's see if we can figure out some chords here. I've got a very simple recording of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and I've played it in such a way with a really emphasized bass line, so it's easy to hear. Check it out. The first thing you want to do is sing the roots of the chords. So let's do it one by one. So we start on a C, we start on the 1. Where does it go next? 1. Then it goes up here. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's a G. Did you see how I figured that out? I didn't just poke around looking for that note I was singing. I actually used my relative pitch to figure out that that other note was a G. So I started with the 1, and then I sang this mystery note because I heard that in the bass, and then I figured out if this was the 1, and I go up the scale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I knew I was on the 5 there. I didn't have to poke around on the piano. I don't want you hunting for notes on the keys or the guitar or whatever. You want to try to do this without the aid of an instrument as much as possible. Let's keep going. So we have the 1 right there. There's the 5. Back to the 1, and then it goes up to this note. Okay, what is this note that I'm singing? This is the mystery note. We're going to figure it out the same way. If this is the 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, there it is. And we're in the key of C. 4 is F. And this is all tracking with those usual suspects. This is a simple version of a song, so we're likely to see those basic chords like the 1 chord, the 4 chord, the 5 chord, and that's what we have. I'll play the whole thing one more time and see if you can figure out the rest of the chords. So we have the C major. Then we went to G major, I'm singing the roots. And then back to C major. And then F major, the 4 chord. And then back to C major, the 1 chord. Sing those roots along with the recording. Now that's a very simple version of the song. Let's do a slightly more complex version now. Okay, there's some extra chords in there. It sounds a little more jazzy, so maybe we're using chords other than just the 1, the 4, and the 5. Again, thinking about those usual suspects. So maybe there's a 3 chord in there, or a 6 chord, or a 2 chord. Let's sing those roots. So we start off here again. Then we go up to here. We started here, then we go up to here. So what note is that? We know we're starting on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's an A. You can always check yourself. 1, 6. And then we're here. That's the 1, 2, 3. So we have an E. 1, 6, 3. Notice I'm not just naming chords like C major, A minor, E minor. That's correct, but I'm also thinking in terms of chord functions. You want to be always thinking about chord functions. 6. Goes back to the 1 again, just like the simpler version. Goes up to the 4. Ba 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 ba. 1 is right here. So what is this note? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a G. When you're listening for the bass, you have to ignore everything else. That means ignoring the melody, which is what our ear is gravitating towards naturally. Resist the urge to latch onto that melody note and instead direct your ear underneath it and listen for that bottom note. Now, this version of the song is all on piano, so you might actually have an easier time hearing the bass on a fully produced pop recording where the bass is actually a bass and separate from the other instruments. Here's the whole thing one more time. I'll put the roots up on the screen. Try to sing along, sing the roots of each chord. Da, 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 da. Like I've said several times in this video, practice with simple children's songs and listen for that bass and sing along with the bass, not the melody. Once you do figure out the roots of the chords, the next step is to figure out the chord quality. And you want to start with the simplest form of that chord. Just start with the triad. Even if there are sevenths or other wild extensions thrown in there, just start with the triad. Is it a major chord? Is it a minor chord? Maybe it's a sus chord. Maybe it's diminished. Maybe it's augmented. And by the way, sus means sus4. So instead of like a C major chord like this, you bring the 3 up to the 4 and you get that suspended sound. And just like before, when it comes to figuring out these chord types, use your knowledge of music theory to help narrow down your options. You know, if you're in the key of C major and you have an F in the bass there, it's likely an F major chord. Could it be F minor? Could it be that 4 minor sound in a major key? Yes, it's possible, but chances are it's F major. So you can try that out. Or you can listen to the chord and just see if you can figure it out with your ears. Does it sound like a major chord or a minor chord? And then you can go and test it out and see if you're right. What I'm getting at here is this hybrid approach to figuring out chords. You're using your ear, but you're also using your knowledge of music theory. You're listening for chord function colors, but you're also listening for the bass when the chord function color isn't coming to you. You have all of these tools, you gotta use them. That's how you can figure out the chords to songs quickly and accurately. Okay, we are almost done. You've got the root of the chord. You figured out the core part of the chord. You know it's major or minor or diminished or whatever. Then you can start to listen for sevenths or other extensions like 9s and sharp 11s and 13s. Now, I'm not gonna lie, transcribing all of those extensions can be challenging. You have to listen inside the chord. Sometimes it means looping that one chord over and over and over again, listening for all of the notes inside the chord. For instance, if I play this voicing right here. So the easiest notes to pick out are the bookends, the highest note and the lowest note. So we can hear that note up there, and we can hear this note down here. But what about the notes in the middle? That's where things get tricky. You have to listen over and over and over again. So do you hear this note here? Da da da. Okay, there's another one. So that was G. But what about this? Do you hear this note in here? Da 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 da, that's a D. And then I have the C, the 1 right next to it. This takes practice, and you can actually practice it just like that. Play a random chord with lots of notes in it and try to listen for the notes that are inside. Listen for those inner voices. It does get easier. You will get better at it. You just have to do it over and over again. This is not just about listening closely. That is a big part of it, but you also have to think. What notes are likely to be in that chord? You can think about extensions. Like if you have a 1 chord and it sounds like there's extra color in there, well, it's likely that there's a 7 or maybe even a 9. Those are extensions that show up a lot on 1 chords. Now, how do I know that? Well, I've studied music theory, and the more you study music theory, and I've got lots of videos that explain chord extensions and other more advanced music theory like that. If you study that, then you'll be looking for it and listening for it, and you'll have a much easier time recognizing those extensions when they show up in the music you're trying to figure out how to play. Just don't hit your head against the wall too hard when trying to figure out those subtler sounds. The bulk of the chord is the root, and that core chord quality like major, minor, sus, dominant, that's really the most important part and where you should be focusing your energy, especially at this stage in the game. So before we go, let's flesh out some of these chords in Somewhere Over the Rainbow. We know this is the first note, it's a C. And I think it's just major, it's not minor, right? No, it's not minor. After all, we are in the key of C major. I'm just thinking out loud here. So we went up to this note in the bass. That's the 6, it's an A. Now the 6th chord in the key of C major is typically A minor. Does this sound like a minor chord? Yeah, it is, especially since we have the C in the melody. Sometimes you can use clues like that to help you figure out what the chord quality is. So we have C major. And then we have this note in the bass, that's the E. And E in the bass means it's the 3 chord. Remember, we're always bringing it back to chord functions. What's the 3 chord in the key of C major? What's the quality? It's minor. So it's probably some kind of E minor chord. And it sounds like an E minor chord too. Let's see if it sounds good when I play it. We'll check it against the recording. It sounds like I'm missing something though. I'm hearing this note in there. That's a D. Okay, this kind of makes sense. If a D is played with an E minor chord, that makes it E minor 7. So we actually have this sound. That sounds right. That sounds like the recording. Let's keep going. Back to the 1. C major, no big deal. Then we go right here to the F. The F is the 4 chord in C major, likely a major chord, F major. That sounds right to me. Followed by, we have this note in the bass right here. That's a G. Okay, what's the note in the melody? Interesting. Well, if it's a 5 chord, it's probably a major chord, but we also have an A. So if we have G major, which is the 5 chord, that sounds pretty close. Let's take another listen. This G major with the A on top still sounds like something is missing. So let's use some music theory to help figure out what that note might be that we're not playing. Well, if it's a 5 chord, and I have the 9 in there already, that A, what about the 7? The 7 is gonna be an F. Let's try it out. That sounds about right. Yep, that's it. And then back to the 1. But I can hear right away this chord sounds a little jazzy, like there's something extra colorful about it. So if it's a jazzy sounding chord, it's probably a 7 chord. It's the 1 chord. So instead of just C major, let's try C major 7. I'm gonna play, instead of this C right here, I'll play B, which is the major 7. That sounds good to me. So that's the hybrid process, using my ear and my knowledge of music theory to quickly and accurately figure out what these chords are. From there, I can start to look at the chords in mini progressions, like this 1 chord going to the 6, going to the 3. In my memory bank, I could label that as the rainbow progression, the 1 to the 6 to the 3. And if I hear something similar to that in another song, it'll remind me, oh, that sounds like Somewhere Over the Rainbow, where it goes 1, 6, 3. And now it's up to you to put these steps into practice. So good luck. Remember to download the chord scale charts. They'll make this a whole lot easier. And if you want to watch another video where I break down some even more advanced harmony, you can check out this video right here. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.